New demand for the grains. Earlier in the 16th century, the rich landlords used to do enclosures for the sheep farming. But in the 18th century, the situation was different. Now they are doing it for food grain production or grain production, to enhance the grain production. Why? Because of the growing of the population of England has increased from 1750 it is 7 million, in 1850 it went to 21 million, and in 1900 it was 30 million. So it increased nearly fourfold times. Now there was a good demand for the food grains. This they understood very well. So they started to enclose the common lands into their private lands. And the other factor which also contributed for the increase of the prices was the migration. People from the rural areas, they started to migrate into the urban areas because England is now in the turn of industrialization process. So that period we need many number of labor people to work in the industries. Many people, due to the failure of the seasonal rains, they started to migrate from rural areas to urban areas in search of jobs. So this was the right time that overpopulation, migration, so this all led to the people compulsory they have to buy grains to sustain their life. This led for the rice price to shoot up like rockets. The other important factor which I added for this one was the war with the France. England was in war with France, and this also gave blockage in the trade from Europe to the other parts. So finally now it became, the cost of the grains became like a rocket price, where it has become very costly, and now these rich landlords turned their attention towards converting the food grain fields into their enclosed areas, and they want to have more control over more lands. As the profits flowed to them, they started to pressurize the parliament also to make the laws in favor of them. They want the laws so that these could not be unlegal or illegal acts. So the parliament also was pressurized, and parliament brought certain acts known as enclosed acts, which made these actions of the rich landlords as legal actions. Now in 1868 we are now discussing about the age of enclosures. We saw the reasons what made the rich people to make the lands as enclosed, the common lands into their private lands, and they are getting the legalization also for that. Now moving on further into the details, in 1868 England started to consume 80% of its production, and the rest of the 20% has been imported or exported to the other countries depending on the situation. But as the population increased in any country, that would be followed by the food shortage system, because the population increases, simultaneously the production of the food grains do not increase in any country. But in England the situation was different. As the population started to increase, the food grains production also started to increase to compensate that balance. How it got increased? They did not do any magic or wonder, or did not create any agricultural techniques to do this one. So what made it possible for them to do like this? That is, the new lands were brought into agricultural lands or converted into agricultural lands, like the pasture lands. The pasture lands were brought under the earlier, which was common land, now converted into the private lands. Then the open fields which are given to the common people were also taken off. Forests were cut down and they were converted into cultivatable lands. Then marshy tracts were also occupied and they were also brought under cultivation. So these all, whatever and wherever the land is available, they started to grab that one and start to increase the production of the food grains in that. Some of the other natural techniques which allowed them to increase more production is that they used to use simple technique and innovations like turnip and cloves cropping. Turnip and cloves cropping increase the soil fertility. Why does the turnip and the cloves increase the soil fertility? That is because in the turnip or in the cloves, they naturally have the capacity to resend the nitrogen into the soil. Because of that, the fertility of the soil will increase. So they used to give one crop for turnip and cloves, and the rest they used to give the food production crops or food grain crops. And again, when the fertility comes down, again they used to go for the turnip and cloves cropping. Like that, they started to increase the fertility of the soil and production increased rapidly. And turnip is also a fodder for their cattle. Now, as the soil fertility comes down, they start to cultivate the turnip or the clover crops, which increases the nitrogen levels of the soil. And also, turnip acts as a fodder for the cattle, so they need not buy anything for their cattle especially. So they can feed the sheep, they can do the cultivation, which adds many benefits for them. And now the enclosures started to become one of the major reason to do the investments. For doing long term investments, they started to invest on the enclosures. So enclosures has become one of the important aspect to do the long term investments. This is also supported by the British officials and the parliament, as these people are very rich. They force the parliament to make acts in the favor of them. What about the poor? What happened to the poor when these kind of enclosures started to happen? Fencings have come up. Earlier, which was a common land where they all used to do the regular activities. Yes, even during that time, they don't have sufficient amount of income. They had merely very less income, but still they are able to sustain their life. But as the time passed on, it has become very difficult for them. Why it has become very difficult for them? Because the firewood which they used to collect earlier, now they could not collect it. They could not graze their cattle earlier, which they used to do that one, and they used to collect the berries and the apples, the fruits. They used to hunt the rabbits, the small animals for the meat. Now for all these things they need to pay some price, which the poor man cannot pay. Earlier they used to have everything freely for them, so they used to do these activities to sustain their living. Actually they have very less income, so they used to have the compensation from this, their cattle, something like this. But now for everything, if they start to pay, they can't pay that one. So basically they are not having stable income. So that made them to be very much frustrated. And in the Midlands of England, these situations became larger and larger. The enclosures became private property of the rich landlords, and there is no other alternative left out for the poor man, because their customary rights are now not there. Earlier they used to have rights in the forest, they used to have rights in the fields, they used to have rights to graze their animals in the fields, they used to collect the fruits and all these things. But as these start to disappear, now there is no possibility for them to live there, and as they are very poor, they need to do some work in order to have some income for themselves. So now they started to move towards the south. Even in the south also, they could not find any secure jobs. They always used to do the odd jobs. One other reason why the poor became very much angry or frustrated or insecure, because earlier the poor people also used to stay with the rich landlords only, and used to eat with them or stay with them, and used to do various other odd jobs to help the landlord or the master. But as the time passed on, the rich landlords and the masters want to increase their profit percentages. So now they decided to hire the labor only during the harvest time whenever it is required, and the other times they never used to take them or pay anything for them. The wages are fixed, the number of days you work, you will be paid for them. So now it has become very difficult for the poor man to survive. This also led to the very unstable income for them. Now no jobs, no freedom for them, no customary rights for them, and there is no other solution to get a solid income. So this led for them to come to a situation where they are having completely unstable income.
If you like this video, please give a thumbs up. Please subscribe to our channel to get more videos on CBSE syllabus.